Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 3 of webinar week here with Beyond Pulse. Absolutely delighted today to be joined by a very good friend of ours, Mr. Matt Lawrey, who joins us from a nice outside space, which many of us are unfortunate or fortunate enough to not be having right now. But Matt gets to go outside and enjoy a nice coffee in the sunshine. So, Matt, thank you for being here. I'm obviously very excited about diving into some of your background and the fantastic knowledge that you have to share with the people on the line. Just so everybody is aware, whether you're watching this on whether you're tuning in now live or on pre-record, the footage obviously will be shared again. Feel free to pop up and ask questions, and then we'll share an infographic of this conversation as well with some of the show notes for any resources that Matt might direct us to. So without further ado, Matt, so that I don't butcher your introduction and undersell you, if you could just provide a quick synopsis of who you are, what your background is, why obviously I want to have you here today, and yeah, fill your boots.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks so much, Tom. Apologies if there's some background noise. I got kicked out of the house because the girlfriend is doing online teaching. She's a teacher, so I have to find my own way to figure out how to do these things. So we're really happy to be here. My name is Matt Lawrey. I'm the Academy Manager and the Atlanta United Academy U15 coach here in Atlanta. So been doing that since we started. So I was hired as the U12 coach and then just kind of moved around with different roles throughout the organization back in July of 2016. So now my main role is a lot of the kind of not operations, but the curriculum, coaching, education, on the field kind of stuff is the majority of what I do, as well as just coach the U15s. So that's kind of my quick background. And again, thanks so much, Tom, for having me.
Oh, of course, buddy. And as ever, very modest. We're obviously going to talk today about your experience and journey being selected as one of the I believe 20 coaches this year from the MLS academies that were sent over to France to go through the elite formation coaching license over there from the MLS and FFF partnership. So before we get into that, Matt, during this week I've been asking a lot of the guests to give a shout out to the people that have most inspired them. So in tough times right now, we want to acknowledge and recognize good practice and the people out there that are doing great things. So if you could pick your all-time all-star five-a-side team of coaches, people that have inspired you or you've been impressed by as you've worked alongside or worked for, who would they be, and what is a characteristic of theirs that you believe separated them from the rest?
Okay, so the first would have to be my boss, because otherwise I wouldn't have a job. So Tony Annan is an easy one. But seriously, I was his assistant when I joined the academy for 2 years. And he's probably one of the best trainers that I've ever worked with in terms of the training session is always at the very height of getting the players to work, motivation, these kind of things. The environment was unbelievable. So that was something that I quickly took under and tried to learn from him. Second would be Jerry McEwen, who you and I both know very well, but I've worked with him since I started doing ID2 some years back. But his ability to see talent is unbelievable. And it takes me, seeing a kid 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times, he's got it figured out in the first 10 minutes. And it's absolutely incredible. So I think, that's always something that I've adored about him. Celia Mosier, who I don't think as many people would know, but she's a coach that I worked with, just taught me about player management and how to see through the veil that any player would come forward in terms of training. So what are they actually dealing with at home? What kind of day are they having? And not just treat every kid as you're here, you need to work. So she was a big one for me younger on. And then Barry Hill, who again, not many people would know, but he's the director at a small club called Stafford Soccer. And he got me started on everything. So I think I was 19, 20 years old, and he started me along getting my D license and gave me a U9 boys team and did everything for me. So I probably can never ever thank him enough in terms of what he's done for me. And then the final guy would be someone who's probably going to come up a lot within this conversation, but Jean-Claude Gintini. And Jean-Claude is the U17 French national team coach, but he also runs the EFCL, the French course, which I know we're going to chat a lot about. But he's an absolute genius, an absolute genius. His ability to look at a session, determine what needs to be tweaked, determine what's wrong, determine what you need to see, spacing, drop a cone here, set a rule here. Absolutely incredible. So he's been a big piece of the puzzle for me the last 3 years, especially. So I think that would be my top five.
And again, for the value of the people that are listening, who may be less fortunate than me, and this might be the first time that you're coming into contact with Matt. Obviously, we share a background together at ID2, and I've had the pleasure of working on the field side by side you. And I think it's evident that some of the lessons that we're about to talk about are there in your practice, and it's why when you can speak about your background and the people that have influenced you, I always find it fascinating to see, what has led to this person becoming who they are today. So for the value of the people listening, again, maybe some great people to go and search out and try and find more information on or ideas about. So thank you for that, bud. Okay, so let's shift our direction and attention to France. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about the experience, the journey there, and then obviously we'll get into the meat and potatoes of what exactly went on and the lessons that you're able to bring back. So
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I guess just to give it a bit of an overview, because this course was not well known to me even when I was happily put on it. But there have been four generations of the French course, and essentially it started out as the MLS as an entity looking around and saying we would like some different type of coaching education. Nothing against U.S. soccer, nothing against any of the UEFA badges or anything that those people had, but they just wanted a different look in terms of how do we educate our coaches and how do we develop pros was really what they were looking towards. So they started this program with the French Federation, Fred Lipka in particular, who is now works with players in the MLS, but essentially brought Jean-Claude Gintini, who I mentioned, over to teach 20 MLS coaches, MLS Academy coaches. It's about a 14-month course, sometimes 15 months, sometimes 16 months, just depends on the dates. And we meet 6 times over the course of that time period. So the first and the last will be at Clairefontaine, which is a magical place. And then the middle 4 will be at different MLS club locations. So we just hosted this last one in January. I got to go to Houston, Seattle, and yeah, it's a brilliant experience. But over that course, there's obviously a ton of information. The major point is the French way of teaching U15s all the way to U19s, what they call their formation. So how you kind of delve into that age group, knowing that they probably already have some good technical qualities, knowing they probably have some decent tactical decision making, but how do you really break down the game and teach the game at a professional level? How do you get these 15, 16-year-olds to become pros? And you can say whatever you like about the methodology, but France clearly does that well. They have a really, really good track record of creating pros. So it was really interesting from that standpoint. It was long, it was arduous, it took a ton of work, but it was one of the best educational experiences I've been on. Absolutely incredible. So really enjoyed it. Steve Covino, the U14 coach at Atlanta United, is on it now. I just wrapped up last April, so I'm a little bit of a graduate, but you never stop learning. So it's been interesting.
So Matt, obviously you've referenced a couple of times that the intention behind it is to create professionals, and that the French have a pretty incredible record of doing just that. So what was it that stuck out? If there's one or two things that were different than what you're used to, or that have really resonated more deeply with you about how they structure things, or how they stagger information. Obviously, you and I had spoken about the fact that an emphasis on technical work comes at the end of the session. And could you share with the listeners, anything that really resonated, and what were your biggest takeaways?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece of the puzzle that you start to figure out throughout the course is that they don't take soccer and break it down and say, this is how to teach it. They take the player or the student and they say, this is how this age group learns. So they take a 15, 16, 17-year-old kid and they say, okay, well, what makes this individual special in their cognitive development? How do they learn? How do they take in information? And that's the entire basis of their methodology. So some people call it whole part whole. You'll start with the game, but the reality of that is you're starting with a guided game that through rules, through zones, through questioning, you're getting the player to come up with their own solution. I think one of the most important things that they kept saying is, look, these 15, 16-year-old kids, they already think they're pros. You
Right.
have to get them to a point where you are teaching them, but you can't just spoon feed it to them and say, this is the way, this is the way, this is the way. A, you'll get some personalities that don't want to hear that. And B, it'll go in one ear and out the other. And that's a lot of the research they had in educational level. So it's all about having the player come up with their own solution. It's actually your solution. It's actually the coach's solution, but I'm going to guide the player to my solution and they're going to think it's their own. So that kind of trick to get them to really buy in the player was really, really interesting. A different way of looking at it, I thought.
And before you carry on with what comes next, was the use of games or a constraints-led approach, a games-based approach, was that new to you to hear there?
No, not particularly. I think starting with the game or making your session a majority of being played or gameplay, that wasn't new. I know, I'm I'm the old AAB license with US Soccer. I haven't taken the new one. I would like to, but I've heard some really, really good things. But it's a lot more about the game. It's a lot more about letting the player figure things out throughout the game. That wasn't especially new. What was new was the constraints, rules, tweaks that a coach could put on a session to bring out what they wanted. And sometimes it was the opposite of what one would think. So if I'm working on an attacking session, perhaps I'm working on switch the point of attack, getting the ball from the right to the left or whatever it may be. Instead of giving points for the attacking team to do it, I'm going to restrict the defensive team to one side of the pitch, the closest to the ball. So obviously there's now space on the opposite side. So now it's up for the player to figure out that there is space on the opposite side. And then my action that I'm looking to create will come out over and over again just based on the game. It has nothing to do with me. It's just the rule that I've put in place. So that was kind of the tweak that I thought was new or interesting from the French model.
Yeah, and for people who are perhaps a little less familiar with constraints, it's the ability to tweak the rules or the actions that you're looking for from the player, from the task or the environment. So as Matt said, you can bring about your desired action by structuring the environment in such a way or structuring the task of the opposition that you're encouraging the desired action for the team of focus, I guess, for their desired actions to be brought out. So I think it's really interesting, Matt, as you say, you've brought it back here, and we're starting to see a far greater use of that idea in the US now. But certainly something that if people are less familiar with, we can get some resources out to you to give you a little bit more of an insight, because there's tons of really great work going on there. Matt, I thought then you were going to lead into maybe what was going to come next, which is your concept of coaching principles and counter principles in sessions as well. Talk to us a little bit about how, again, maybe the focus on the opposition in a training session could help you bring about your focus on your desired technical or tactical principle for a day as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way we work at Atlanta United Academy was essentially brought from the French course. So whenever
Then
um,
then come off.
whenever you whenever you have a session, you would have two principles that you would think about. One of them your major principle that you're working on, and the counter principle. And quite really, one is the opposite of the other. If I'm working on my center backs and my 6 and my 8, trying to free up space, trying to get open in the build-up phase, I also have to work on press. I also have to work on getting tight marking. I also have to work on getting tight to defend, not allowing players to get the ball. If I work on one without the other, it's going to be too easy. So within our curriculum as a staff, whenever you are working on a certain principle, you always have to think about that counter. And you may even spend more time on the counter, and this is okay. Because the hope is if I continue to work on that press and I continue to think about getting tight defending, the other players are going to have to adapt because they want to compete and they want to win. So that's kind of the basis of how we work.
Yeah, and can you tell me, have you been in a situation, obviously, at Atlanta, you have the luxury of a team of coaches, and certainly not in a position where you're having to do, a session by yourself or multiple sessions on a night by yourself. But is it easy enough, this idea? Is it easy enough to do if you just have yourself as a coach, as opposed to a team of coaches that could potentially emphasize something, a focus group from the opposite team having this to work on? Obviously, you referenced US Soccer, and a lot of their teaching is based on head coach and assistant coach. Assistant coach coaches the principal. Head coach coaches the principal. Assistant coach coaches the counter principal. But can you do it by yourself?
Yeah, to be honest, and this is something that I need to work on, but I'm a tad of a control freak during training, and my poor assistant doesn't do very much. The poor guy. He's fantastic. He's very, very detailed. He helps with the setup, and then when I need specific things from him, I'll ask them from him. But a lot of the coaching I do myself, which again is probably something I need to work on, but it's definitely doable. Certainly much easier when you have another pair of eyes, especially when they're focused on something specific. You take the press, I'll take the build, let's go. But I think as long as you are looking for very specific actions within your session, you're able to do it. I'm looking for a moment where my 6 is going to counter movement. He's going to move one way, maybe a little shove on the defender, and then pull off into the side to get a little bit of space. That's the action I'm looking for. So if I specifically go in trying to create that action, and I know I'm looking for that, I think you can start to say, nope, the space isn't good enough. This needs to be fixed here. Or, hey, this is an attacking moment where you need to free yourself up earlier. Or, no, this is a defending moment. You're not tight enough. It's too easy for him. So I think it's the specificity of going into a session thinking about what am I really clearly looking for, and then what do I need to start bouncing off the players to get that.
Absolutely. I'm going to just jump to 2 things. Andrew, I've seen your message. The line broke up ever so slightly, but what Matt's talking about is principles and counter principles. So his example was, if my topic for a night is on building out the back or improving the build-up phase and playing through a 6, then it's false if I don't think about what the counter principle would be, which is, pressing from the front and getting tight, with my 10 or my 8, or denying the opportunity for the opponent to build. So in essence, it's looking at what your primary objective is from the session and thinking about how you can structure it to make sure that the defensive responsibilities, if it were an attacking topic, are apparent and met from the opposite team. So I'm sure we can, Matt, I don't know if there might be any blog posts or anything for people to dive a little bit deeper in there, but if there is anything that you can think of, maybe you can shoot me a text and I'll pop it up.
Yeah, I'll take a look. Nothing off the top of my head, but I'll get back to you.
Yeah, perfect. And then what I want to talk about next is, obviously you've referenced that when we're trying to create professional footballers, and the emphasis may be on just a very small portion of your group. So you have 20 kids that are training. Again, let's keep it with that idea of improving your build-up phase. Maybe the focus of that session is really on your 4 or your 5 or your 6, right? It's not going to be on the goalkeeper, the back, the fullbacks. Maybe it's just on one of those 3 players in the middle, because that's the guy or the girl that has been identified as having pro potential. Can you talk a little bit more on the specificity that you might operate with, or that this course taught you to be conscious of thinking about in your practice design, and how that emphasis might really allow you to push those players of high potential to their maximum levels?
There it goes. Absolutely. So that's always the case, is why we have a job every day, why we work every day, is to try to produce that pro who At the end of the day, it may sound sad, but he's going to make millions of dollars for the academy because we go sell him to Europe and all of that. But trying to get that player to keep pushing their limits and keep thinking about things at a really, really high level. One of the big pieces with the French course was always quantitative feedback. It's sometimes difficult to go up to a 16-year-old kid and say, this pass isn't good enough because of A, B, and C, whatever, I need it better. Okay, but does that player leave that conversation knowing specifically what they need to work on or specifically what their target is? But throughout a session, we'll always think about quantitative things for the players to think about. So, hey, this is my build-up session. My two center backs, I want you to think about breaking lines with the pass. We're going to play a 4-minute game. I'll just quickly bring the center backs over. I need all of you to get at least 5 passes that split a line. Okay, 5. That's your challenge, and then you walk away. Then you can come back after those 4 minutes. Maybe you have some coaching pieces for the whole group. Maybe you have a rule tweak, and then you bring those center backs quickly in. Who hit 5? Quick show of hands. Nope. 3, 4. Okay, you got 6. Excellent, good work. And then just give them a little something that maybe you noticed, a little more disguise. Take your first touch away from where you want to hit that final ball to try to move that forward. But the use of quantitative data, it doesn't always need to be straight from statistics. It doesn't need to be over the course of a game. It can be very, very quick, very, very brief, where the player can just record for themselves. But now they have a set goal that they know that they're trying to reach. And that was a huge thing with the French course. Give them something that they can attain. Give them something that they can reach. Really, really key for them.
And what about, Matt, how having a focus, having that as a focus for you during your session, how might that impact the coaching choices that you make? Because if your target is 5 and they get 0, my question to you, is that always on the player or is that on the coach as well? Because you said there's a couple of people, I think it was Jean-Claude who you referenced, who was so good at making a tweak here, a tweak there to their practice design to encourage or allow for that desired action to be seen. How has an emphasis on, on the quantitative aspect impacted your delivery and your practice structure as well?
Yeah, I think one of the major pieces with the French course is it's always on the coach. It's never on the player. Players are going to have bad days. Yes, we need to set expectations, but if you leave a session and think that wasn't good enough, you need to think, okay, how could I have improved it? The players are what the players are. Maybe they come with their own set of emotional baggage. Maybe they have a bad day. This is life. But we as coaches need to make sure that our environment is as perfect as it can possibly be in terms of the details. So one of the biggest things was proper space. Always looking for, okay, this center back is not able to hit these passes through. He needs more space. He needs a bit more time to take his head up, to look, to find the action that we're looking to create for him. Or it's too easy for him. Let's make the space smaller. Let's make the pressure higher. So it's if you had a center back and you wanted him to get 5 passes and he got 0, you have to take a look at the environment. Maybe he toe blowed 6 out of bounds and he's just having one of those days. That's possible, but more than likely he's just under too much pressure, or doesn't have enough time, or isn't able to cognitively think about everything that he needs to before he receives the ball. So always looking to tweak. I think the major thing Jean-Claude taught all of us is that when you start a session, it's not the end of you tweaking things, whether it's space, whether it's moving a cone, whether it's adding a rule. You need to adapt as it goes. You come in with a great plan. You need to also have pocket rules. You need to also have a thought about what could go wrong. What would I do if this happens? What would I do if this happens? So always thinking what's next.
Yeah, I think that's such important and such critical advice, and thank you for sharing that. I think obviously it's hard for us to know the level of experience on the line, and certainly for those that are watching, but I think back to being a younger novice and being afraid of making change, and it appearing like I've made a mistake and that what I wanted to achieve wasn't being witnessed. But the reality for everybody is that sometimes coaching is messy and it's complicated, and so is learning, right? So I think, Matt, as you said, I love that, those little pocket rules and the concept of what would I do. We have a duty of care as coaches to be able to tweak, modify, manipulate to meet the needs of the learner. And we take our ego out of it, and it might be uncomfortable to do. But I think the willingness, as you as you expressed, Matt, to do it is something that takes potentially a good coach to be a great coach. And that kind of selflessness and removal of ego is critical. The other thing I want to reference is to give credit to US Soccer here. They have been big now. And Matt, you said you've not been through the newer model A license, but the B and the A and below that, they're talking a lot about session structure and the inability to progress through your practice and achieve what you set out to achieve and hope to achieve if your structure was incorrect. So as you said, that might be it might be the space that you're working within. It might be restart positions. It might be, we're talking about building out the back. And I remember, our last ID2 camp, and we've got players collapsing into the penalty area. It's, hey, we have to stop. We have to reset. We have to reorganize. It has to be real. Without it being real, it's a false picture. So again, to give those guys credit, and for people that might yet to have experienced it, that emphasis on structure is so critical. Matt, I would like to move on. You obviously mentioned, Steve, you've just joined. Could you turn your webcam off, please, bud? Thank you. Matt, you referenced earlier, some people may be surprised by the structure of the French course. So yes, there's an overview of whole part whole, or games-based or play-based practices, constraints-led practices. But talk to us about what they emphasize as well from a technical development perspective, and how they incorporated that, because I think it's a pretty interesting and novel approach that those guys had over there.
Yeah, I'll give you the quick overview. So essentially, there's three different types of activities, for lack of a better phrase, to use within the French methodology. So think in terms of small-sided, back in the old B license, A license, then expanded small-sided, and then games. We can think in that model. Essentially, you would start with a self-adaptive game. So again, this is a game where you set different tweaks, different rules, different whatever, to get the players to really start to discover the solution and get the players to really think about, what do I need to do within this game to be successful? Then you would move to a tactical decision making. So essentially, players would be set in very specific functional roles. You're a 4, you're going to be here, this is where you live, this is where you are. The right back's going to be here, the 6 is going to be here. And it's very quick, set, 10 to 12 second repetitions of trying to go through an action. So again, to stay on the build-up phase, you could have a ball being played to the center back. This starts the activity. He's being pressed. How does he find a solution to get the ball eventually to, let's say, a mini goal at half field? And he's up against a certain amount of opposition. He has a certain amount of teammates to work with, and you kind of progress through and get them to see that very, very specific moment of the game over and over and over again, with perhaps some tweaks, with perhaps some pocket rules, with some things that you take away or move in later on to make it more difficult as they start to get it. And then finally, you'll do execution, is what they call it. But it's essentially a technical pattern, but it is really, really, really specific in terms of the details that we're looking for, and it's meant to build relationships between players. So now you're talking about the relationship the center back has with the 6 and the right back, trying to get to the point where if I'm shifting my hips and I'm showing a pass to the right back, I actually want the 6 to show up in that hole, because I need that disguised pass to be able to break this line. And then detailing those through for the players, getting the hips right, getting the touch right, super, super specific, to get the player to actually go through that pattern at a really high cognitive level. Mentally, they should be really, really zoomed into to what's going on. And those are kind of the 3 set ways in which they work. They really like you to start the self-adaptive game first, because again, that kind of gets the player thinking about the solution and thinking about the topic. And then however you want to set the rest of the session, perhaps I do execution, and then I'll move into a tactical decision-making game. Maybe I'll come back to a game at the end, just how it worked, or be able to just finish the session basis.
Matt, we just lost you as you were finishing what you were saying. Can you just repeat? Have you still got us?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, just about those are the three activities. Those are the three phases of the session, but it's not really important which one comes first or which one comes last. They want you to do the self-adaptive game first because that can kind of set the idea for the players. But then after that, you can tweak, you can move. The hierarchy of each activity doesn't really exist.
Perfect. Matt, what strikes me as we're speaking again here is just the depth of specificity that you're talking about sessions being constructed with. If you had one piece of advice to give to the coaches on the line about how the course has impacted your practice design to allow you to be that specific, what would it be?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the biggest thing that I've taken and kind of really pushed on our staff who have not taken the course is the use of high-level clips. And it sounds silly and it sounds minute, but the ability to take your principle, break it down to an individual action that you want to see. We can talk about the center back disguising the pass to break the line, finding a clip of that done at the very, very high level, and then showing, okay, this is really individually how it happened, and breaking down each second. When is the center back checking his shoulder? Because we as coaches always say, okay, check your shoulder, check your shoulder. Yes, but when? When specifically should my center back check his shoulder? As the ball is traveling to him, because he knows that the ball is already on its way. He knows that it's going to eventually reach his foot. That's not going to change. And that gives him the moment where he can start to look around and assess what's happening right before he receives the ball. And before, I would just talk about, okay, check your shoulder. When? Just check your shoulder. Just do it. It's behavior. But after taking a look at high-level clips and after taking a look and actually breaking down, this is what the high-level players are doing. This is what Champions League level players are doing. This is how I need to teach my players. So we as a staff will sit down once a week. We'll have a certain topic, and everyone will have to bring a high-level clip to the table. And everyone will show their high-level clip and say, this is my video of Michael Parkhurst hitting a pass through Columbus Crew's press. And then the next person would go, and we'll break down each clip to where we know what we're looking for, and we know what we're going to teach, and we know what words we're going to use, and we know how we're going to talk to our players about their hips, and how we're going to talk to the players about their first touch. So in terms of a learning piece, it's incredible, but also in terms of a bringing the club together, bringing the coaches together, getting us all speaking the same language, getting us all on the same page, it's everything. So we're really, really big on using those clips in a lot of different ways.
Oh, that's brilliant, mate. Thank you for that. It's definitely such valuable insight for people. Matt, I'm very conscious that we're going to start to run short on time because I know we had to adjust things so you can not get fired and get to a staff meeting. But again, another question. Col, how are you, mate? Thanks for being here. Matt, Colin asks, how do you find the balance between learning through adversity and failure in a session and the need to tweak the session to allow success?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's interesting. We had that question a lot throughout the French course. And it always comes down to what group you have and where are they? Did they just come off a 6-0 pumping? Do they need a little more success on a Monday session? Or are they, coming off a 4-0 win against a good team and they're starting to think really highly of themselves? So there's a piece of that, of course, the psychological piece. But in being more specific in going through the sessions, the French staff would often say in the self-adaptive game, the first part of your session, you want to have a little more success. You don't want them to get it right away, but you want them to get to a point where 60% of the time, 70% of the time, you're getting the action you want and you're getting it pretty good. Maybe specifically there's some things that need to get tweaked, but you're getting to a point where me as a coach, I'm happy. So do I need to, change the size to allow more success? What do I need to do to get to a point where we're there? With the tactical decision making, 50%. They want the players to fail 50% of the time and have success 50% of the time. And you weren't trying to reach 100% success ever. If you hit that,
It's not hard enough.
But they really wanted those players to have a successful moment and then have a moment where, oh crap, what do I do here? That was really, really key for them. And I thought that was really interesting. And then the execution model, obviously you want 100% success. It's essentially a pattern. It's without opposition. It's around mannequins. But the detail of what you're asking for the players should bring out more failure within that. So I always thought that was a really interesting response within each pedagogy, within each activity. You're looking for a different set of success, and you're looking for a different ratio of success. But that was their answer, and that's what I've adhered to the last 2 years. I find it really interesting.
Yeah, again, I think there's two things that I would draw to on that. One is, again, that the comfort in the coach being uncomfortable in success not being witnessed right away, right? So having to allow players to fail. Sometimes we have an innate desire to fix and help and improve. But as I said earlier, feeling okay with it being a little bit messy and trusting in, as you said, Matt, that the fact that that's very intentional. And the second, we were speaking to Dan Abrahams yesterday, and my personal background is similar to Dan in that my master's is in sports psychology. So the concept of early success and how it can facilitate feelings of competency and link that to intrinsic motivation and self-determination theory, and the kids wanting to then immediately be in, there's definitely a balance, as we said, between it being too easy, and if we think about concepts of flow and not being appropriately challenged, but that ability to get them in at a point where, yeah, we get enough success where I want to stay with this, right? And then I can kind of ramp it through. As it's interesting to maybe think about why they came up to the conclusions and the values that they did there. So, Matt, closing thoughts, any last final words of wisdom before I let you go, or if anybody wants to pop up on the chat and fire away with a closing question. I do need to let Matt go within the next 5 minutes or so. So if anybody wants to jump in, please feel free to do so now. If not, Mr. Lawrey, I'm going to put you on the spot and have some inspirational parting words.
It's tough. First of all, thanks so much for having me. And I guess in terms of inspirational parting words, it's especially during nowadays and these times that we're kind of going through, they're a little unprecedented. No one really knows what to do or how to act, and we as youth soccer coaches probably aren't going to see a pitch or do what we really want to do over the next couple. I don't know. So having things like this, Tom, and the ability to share and the ability to give information and take information is going to be so valuable. So my biggest piece would be everyone needs to find a way to keep learning and keep growing, because we're not going to be able to strap our boots on for a little while. So doing this stuff is fantastic.
It's a nice plug, mate. Thank you for that. I do have one question, Jordan. Great question as well, Matt. Just to close, what's the biggest gap you see from players coming into the academy from outside? What talents afford the player a chance? Great question, Jordan.
It's a really good question. I'm not sure how accurately you'll be able to answer that, because it is so different player to player and club to club. But the biggest gap that we see is the ability for a player to concentrate, which sounds a little crazy, but generally what happens if we have a player come in at 15, 16, he's probably been one of the best players at his outside club, at his local club for some time. So he's been able to mentally switch in and switch out, because it's okay. He's going to figure things out. He might receive the ball with 2 or 3 players on him, but he's going to be able to get out because he's a good player. But at the level that these players are now in, and they're surrounded by others that can tackle just as well, or just as big, strong, and physical, are just as good at checking shoulders and reading space, suddenly they now have to concentrate 90 minutes out of 90 minutes. They cannot switch off. And that is the most difficult thing, I think, for some of these players. Everyone has the talent, everyone has the ability, but be able to do it over and over and over again consistently, that's the difference. And that was one of the big differences the French staff told us, that everyone has talent. You need to get a kid to consistently do the same thing over and over again well. Everyone can do it 1 out of 10. Everyone can do it 2 out of 10. But a lot of concentration, a lot of mental stress. It takes a player who is willing to dive into those sessions and say, okay, let's get better. And that I think takes players some
Matt, you just muted yourself. I don't. Maybe you'd finished. We just lost you a little bit, but
Okay. Did you get most of it?
I think we got most of that. Yeah, we got the crux of that answer.
Perfect.
And for me, it's a nice closing thought, because it obviously links very nicely to yesterday's conversation with Dan, and the importance of psychosocial skills being evident in everything that we do, and not being able to separate the decision from any moment of the game. And obviously a friend of ours, Todd Bean, who speaks about cognitive fidelity, and the use of games and why they're so important is because they put players in those positions where they're asked to make those game realistic decisions over and over and over and over and over and over again. So the use of that is fantastic. So Matt, just to close as we wrap up, and I say a thank you on behalf of obviously Team Beyond Pulse and everybody that's listening. How can these guys find you, contact you if there's anything that kind of came up where they would like a little bit more insight, or just to continue to learn from the wonderful experiences that you've had?
Yeah, just threw my email up there. I think everyone can see that, yeah, on the chat. But that's, if you want to reach out, give me a shout. Obviously, I'm bored out of my mind now. I think we all are, so I have plenty of free time. But you can shoot me an email. I have some resources on some of this stuff. The French course is a little different, just because there isn't a lot of stuff out there. It's kind of the course is the course, and the stuff that is out there is oftentimes in French. So that makes it difficult. But I'm happy to share with anyone whatever I have, or any more ideas that someone might have. So there's the email, and then give me a shout, and any way I can help, I'm happy to.
Perfect. Well, Matt, thank you ever so much for sharing your time with us today. For everybody on the line, again, thank you for being here and taking the time to make yourself better, and obviously for the benefit of the players with which we all work. Today is Webinar Wednesday, so we do go again at 3:30 Eastern time. Dr. Ed Cope is joining me from Loughborough University in the UK. Another one where I'm sure your pens and your paper will be in full use. So hopefully we look forward to seeing you all then. And Matt, again, from all of us, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
Bye, mate.